My name is Mark R. LePage, and you are listening to EntreArchitect Podcast, where each week I speak with inspiring, passionate people who share their knowledge and expertise, all to help you build a better business as a small firm entrepreneur architect. Today on the EntreArchitect Podcast, I'm speaking with Paul Sippil, a forensic 401k consultant who helps business owners better understand the retirement plans they offer their teams. With a background in auditing, accounting, and financial advising, Paul discovered that many business owners are unknowingly paying excessive fees, working with conflicted advisors, or offering plans that don't truly work or serve their employees. For small firm architects competing for talent and trying to build healthy, sustainable businesses, understanding retirement benefits is more important than ever. This conversation is about protecting your people, strengthening your culture, and making smarter long-term business decisions. Paul Sippil, welcome to EntreArchitect Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. This is an important conversation that we're going to have here. You know, our audience are thousands of small firm architect business owners working every day just to try to keep things going and get the projects out the door and make sure their employees are happy, make sure the benefits are good. But I don't think that they often focus specifically on retirement plans, except for maybe when they chose them. And every once in a while, they need to maintain them. But I want to have a little bit deeper conversation here for our audience so they can learn a little bit more about maybe some of the pitfalls that they're not even aware of.
Yeah, and there's quite a few. What I've typically found, just as a summary, is that it's something, a 401k or a profit sharing plan, or sometimes what's known as a pension plan, sometimes those are called cash balance plans, is something that's necessary, but not really focused on that much because it doesn't produce any revenue, and it's an administrative function that just takes time away from running the business. But there's a lot to uncover to make sure that everybody's getting a fair deal.
All right. Well, let's talk about that. But before we do that, I want to know more about you. I want to understand your origin story. So go back as far as you want to go back.
Sure.
And share your story. When did you discover your passion for what you do, or who or what inspired you to get started doing it?
I would say that no one person actually inspired me. I just always had a questioning mind. I was always very inquisitive, and I always liked to get to the bottom of things. And if there was ever a situation that I felt was unfair, I would always relentlessly ask questions about it just to make sure that I understood it. So this is why a little over 20 years ago, when one of my former colleagues, when I was at a firm, I've been on my own since May of 2010, informed me that you could actually look up any company's 401k plan or pension plan tax form online. It's always been, or for longer than I've been around, a matter of public record. And I just thought that was so interesting that this data was publicly available. And I suspected people didn't really look that carefully at their tax forms. And I started then, because of learning about this public knowledge, that I could start looking at these tax forms, and I started learning about how the tax forms worked. And I started seeing these very large service charges on a lot of these different plans. And I wondered if the business even knew what these charges were for, because the charges represent participant fees. And I quickly learned that nobody actually sends an invoice. So nobody sees these fees come out of the accounts. They get disclosure documents, but they're typically in the form of percentages, and people don't usually do the math to convert what the fees are in hard dollars. And of course, when you get quoted like a 1% fee and you think it's just required, it doesn't even occur to think of what that fee represents in dollars. And when it's quoted as 1%, it just seems so insignificant and so small. But if you convert that and multiply that by $5 million, which is not an uncommon balance, or $2 million, also not an uncommon balance in an architecture or other professional services firm retirement plan, well, that comes out to tens of thousands of dollars. And in many cases, the financial advisor who's receiving often the bulk of that compensation is not monitored in terms of the amount of actual time they're spending with participants. Why would the business owner monitor the advisor when they don't even know the advisor's getting paid anything? And oh, by the way, the fees are paid in proportion to the account balances. So the business owner, who often has the largest balance, is often paying the largest share of that fee. But there's really no oversight, and there's no incentive to make sure that those fees are reasonable in proportion to the actual amount of usage of the services.
Wow, that's very interesting. I never knew that, and I'm sure many of our listeners have not understood that. Thinking bigger picture, I think many small firm architects think retirement plans in general are something that only larger firms really need to worry about. Why do you think that's a mistake?
Well, the irony is that the larger firms are actually, yes, passing on far more fees in absolute dollars because the plans are much bigger in terms of assets and number of participants, but the per participant charges in these larger firms are minuscule compared to how much you pay per participant if you have especially fewer than 100 employees. That's where the vast majority of excessive fee cases are. And I've done some research and I've learned that about 88% of all plans are smaller plans with fewer than 100 employees. Now, they only constitute about 14% of the total assets, but 88% is a really big number. And the lawsuits that take place are not with the smaller plans. So they don't really have to worry about lawsuits because they're too small for any law firm to actually care because there's not enough money in it for the law firms. The excessive fee lawsuits take place with the larger firms who are passing on extremely low fees to the plan participants. It might be an extra $30 a participant. And as a result of that extra fee that shouldn't be charged, then these large firms might get sued. But that's spread out amongst hundreds of thousands of people. So there's enough money in it for the attorneys. But in the smaller plans, it might be $2,000 to $3,000, sometimes more in unnecessary extra fees per participant. And you don't even have to do the math to realize that that adds up quite a bit over just a few years, let alone decades.
If our listeners are hearing what you're saying and they're thinking, I didn't know I had those kind of fees, where do they go to look to see if they are paying those fees?
Well, they could, because in 2012, there was legislation, it's called 408B2, and it's fee disclosure legislation that, quote unquote, mandates that these service providers disclose their fees, but it was never really new. They always had to disclose their fees, but the Department of Labor thought somehow they were making it more clear by mandating that the service providers produce a convoluted fee disclosure document that's never readily known to even exist to the people who run these plans. And it's, I believe, only updated like once a year. It's not invoiced. It's not like an invoice you get. And this is my big suggestion, because I've been in discussions directly with the Department of Labor to suggest that instead of this fee disclosure, they should suggest the service providers send regular invoices as they're getting paid with service descriptions, and not just invoices showing percentages, but the actual dollars that are extracted from these accounts. And I think that would make everything a lot more clear, because you can't hide from an invoice. But if you don't even know to look at fee disclosure documents and they don't disclose the fees in dollars, there's no actual connection to the fees as they're happening, and it doesn't even feel like you're paying anything.
So can they go to their advisor and just request that those fees be disclosed in a document?
They could, and the disclosure is usually publicly available on the website. But what they should really do is just go to their administrator, to their record keeper, and to the advisor, or maybe the administrator has all of those records, and say, look, I want an accounting of down to the dollar how much money has been taken out of our accounts from each service provider, that being the record keeper, the administrator, the advisor, and if there's a custodian, then the custodian, in dollars each year, let's say for the last 5 years. I want to see the fee trends, because if all you're doing is looking at percentages, the fees can go up while the percentage even goes down, and of course remains the same as the assets go up. So it doesn't feel like anything bad is happening. But if you get the dollar value, and I've done this for clients, or not even clients, prospective clients, just to show them by going through all of their tax forms, publicly available, that is, going all the way back to 2009. Because that's what the Department of Labor makes available. And then when you actually show them the numbers, like year by year, and break down each of the charges shown on their actual tax form, then they can truly see what I think is just insane level of fee progression that's totally disproportionate for level of services. And usually over this time, the number of participants doesn't change that much. And the amount of work to do is not driven by the assets, it's driven by the number of participants. But because these fees are wrongfully charged as a percentage of the total account value, which is totally divorced from the services provided, even if the percentage goes down, which makes people think they got a reduction when they didn't in actual dollars, it shows that people are just getting paid more money without doing more work, just because more money was put into the account and the market went up.
Yeah, interesting. You had mentioned earlier that you've been doing this for 10 plus years. How long?
Since May of 2010.
2010.
And really 2009, when I was at my old firm, I started looking into it, but I really went off on my own to do nothing but consult in this area since May of 2010. And upon talking to these business owners, when I would first call them, and the responses were, I'm not paying anything, and my friend handles that. And my response was, I know you're not, it's the participants, and it really is you because you probably have the largest balance, and your friend is the one who's getting all the money. That's what I'm warning you about. And what they're saying is, well, my friend watches over his or her own compensation. And my question is, well, who's watching your friend? And if you like your friend so much, and this is maybe the most important point, why don't you write him or her or everybody a check? Because in professional services firms, especially architecture firms with partners, the fees are passed down in proportion to the account balances, as I mentioned, which means that the people with the most money pay the largest share. You have 70% of the balance, you're paying 70% of the fees, but with non-tax deductible dollars. Because these are tax advantaged accounts, you always want to have as much money as possible staying inside of them. But what makes matters worse, and to add insult to injury, is that you can't even get a tax deduction for these already exorbitant excessive fees. But if you would have been billed and written a check at the firm level, which again is all your money anyway, you would get a tax deduction like you would for any other business expense. You'd mitigate your fiduciary liability because you don't have fiduciary liability for fees, or hardly any, to the extent that the employer, not the participants, are paying for them. And you're making your plan much more competitive for newer and existing employees. And maybe most important is you'd be more sensitive to costs that the employer actually has to pay for, as opposed to opaque fees that never get billed and you never see the dollars coming out of everybody's accounts. If that's not compelling, I don't know what is.
So is the goal to eliminate these fees, or is it to reduce them? Are the fees to pay the people who are doing the work for you? How does that work? What are the fees actually paying for?
That's a really good question. Actually, it could be both, because speaking of eliminate, that's actually a really thoughtful question, because what people don't know, there's two things, well, a lot of things they don't know, but two major issues. One, you can negotiate these fees. Of course, nobody would ever think to negotiate a fee they don't see or don't even think exists. But let's say you got a plan with $2 million and 10 people in it. I know exactly who the lower cost, better providers out there, one of which is called Ascensus, ASCENSUS.com. I don't make any money off them, like for recommending them. I don't have a financial arrangement, so there's no hidden reason for me to promote them. It's just they're a really good firm, along with a firm called Employee Fiduciary, whose fees are even lower in many cases. Those are very low-cost firms that specialize in plans like 5 to 10 to 20 people. And they charge very minimal fees for record keeping and administration services. You wouldn't negotiate those because they're already low fixed dollar fees. But firms like Principal, Fidelity, Securian, Voya, John Hancock are charging based on a percentage where their fees increase exorbitantly. And as a result, then you have the right to ask for a reduction, at least in the percentage that they're charging you, which isn't perfect, but it's a lot better. And the financial advisor often does very little. I'll give an example where I was talking to a prospective client who shelled out $50,000 approximately in commission payments from 2019 to 2024. He didn't even know he had an advisor, which sounds crazy in and of itself, but it gets worse. So he had his HR director call the administrator just to find out who the advisor was. Because wouldn't you want to know if someone got 50 grand out of your accounts and didn't even know this person existed and never sent you a bill? Well, it turns out upon Googling the advisor's name, that the advisor had actually been dead since 2014.
Wow. So who was collecting that money?
Probably the firm and someone else. And the firm had no incentive to even let them know they existed, because if they didn't know they existed, you never have to do any work when they don't even know who you are. And if you alert someone to who you are, well, A, it might tip them off that they could fire you. And that's part of my long-winded answer to your question. And B, it might cause them to demand they actually do something. But when you're making all this money and you know you can't get fired and you know you never have to do any work, why would you ever even want to let the business owner know that you even exist? that's often the incentive. But that's the other thing. You can fire your advisor, which is what they did. In their case, they fired a dead person, which, sounds a little strange, but that's what they did. But if you're not getting anything out of the advisor, you can eliminate the advisory fee. Absolutely. Well, don't we need an advisor for fiduciary purposes? Not only do you not need an advisor for legal fiduciary purposes, it's actually worse to have an advisor getting excessive fees, or they're always excessive from participants' accounts if they don't do anything, than not having any advisor at all. Now, ideally, it's good to have someone that you pay, write a check to, that's a fee commensurate with what the advisor's doing, and the advisor's actually giving high quality advice to help mitigate your liability and financial advice to the participants. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, if no one's using the advisor, then the advisor shouldn't be paid. But
that's right.
If there is an advisor, that advisor should be an active participant in the plan and actively participating with the members of the plan and answering questions that they might have, advising them on how they might be able to benefit from the plan, all those things that an advisor should be doing.
Yes, that's right. And I'm the only one I know in all the 17 years, really, I focused on this area that's willing to be this brutally and radically honest. Do not pay based on a percentage in most cases, unless you have almost no money in the plan, then I guess a percentage is fine. But be very careful about any kind of asset-based fee over time, especially if you're an architecture firm with a decent amount of cash flow that's pushing up the assets as well as the advisor's compensation. And professional services firms, in almost all cases, should, unless you're having major cash flow problems, should never have the participants pay. You should always write a check because, again, it's mostly the owner's money anyway, and you want to get the tax deduction, and you want everything to be as transparent as possible, and you want that fee to be a fixed dollar fee that's based on the amount of work that the advisor is actually doing. And I've even gotten to the fund selection. I'll add that all these funds are pretty much the same. Most plans have a bunch of index funds, passively managed funds that just mirror what the market does. I'm not against those. I'm a fan. Generally, it's a little more complicated than that in terms of what investments you should have, because I believe there should be some alternatives like gold and silver, and that's a whole other discussion. But keep in mind that if you have these very basic generic funds and they're much lower cost than these actively managed funds that try to outperform the market, and I do think that's a good thing, but they require very little, if any, monitoring. You don't have to analyze the performance of the S&P 500 against the benchmark because it is the benchmark. It's not bad to have the fund, but it is bad to pay an advisor as if they're undergoing this complex analysis when the funds require no monitoring. Even Ted Benna, the inventor of the 401k, back in the early 80s, has echoed the same criticisms as me. Advisors are getting paid as if they're doing an original piece of work, which is just bizarre and inefficient. They need to get back to a fee-for-service model like accountants and attorneys, any other professional service provider, and simply focus on helping people retire.
Let's take a quick break to say thank you to our sponsors for their support of this episode. This episode of EntreArchitect Podcast is supported by WeCollabify, one of our trusted allied partners. As this community has grown over the years, one thing has become very clear to me. The partners we choose matter. Allied partners are not sponsors. They're not advertisers. They are organizations that we've taken the time to get to know, to work alongside, and to trust. They understand the real pressures of practice and the responsibility that comes with leading a small firm. WeCollabify earned that trust by helping small firm owners address a challenge that sits at the center of long-term firm health, building capacity in a way that supports people, not just projects. Their insourcing model brings skilled design, BIM, and technical professionals directly into your team. They work in your time zone, inside your systems, and part of your day-to-day workflow. That integration allows firms to add capacity when it's needed, scale with intention, and grow without sacrificing culture, leadership focus, or quality of life. If you're thinking beyond short-term fixes and focused on building a firm that lasts, I encourage you. Go learn why WeCollabify is one of our trusted allied partners. Visit WeCollabify.com/EntreArchitect to learn more. That's wecollabify.com/EntreArchitect. Gain lessons learned and credits earned with Arcademy, ARCAT's continuing education program. Listen to popular episodes of the Detailed Podcast and earn AIA-approved HSW credits. Yes, you heard that right, HSW credits for episodes of Detailed Podcast. Listen to an episode, check out the learning objectives, and use what you've learned while listening to take the course. The program is free, it's simple, and can be found at arcat.com under the Resources tab. Or just go to arcat.com/Arcademy. That's arcat.com/ARCATEMY. That's arcat.com/Arcademy. Please visit our sponsors today and thank them. Thank them for supporting you, the EntreArchitect community. If a listener, small firm architect, does not yet have a 401k and is considering putting one in place for their team, what is your advice? What are some of the steps they should be taking to make sure that they're getting the right plan and they're not having to pay these exorbitant fees? What is your advice for that listener?
My specific advice is to go and look. There's some other new providers out there that are pretty low cost. One of them is called Vestwell. I would consider them too, but the ones I've worked with a fair amount over the years, I'll once again stress a census and employee fiduciary, especially a plan that doesn't have that many people. And employee fiduciary and a census aren't the fanciest in terms of technology, but employee fiduciary until recently didn't even have what's called 360 payroll integration, which I do think can be important, but I believe they added that, at least if you have one of the major payroll providers like ADP, Paychex, or Paylocity, for example. And that just makes it easier administratively. I would consider those firms not just for their costs, not just for their billing transparency, but the fact that they have what's called a completely open architecture platform. And Vestwell has this too, where there aren't any restrictions on the funds. They don't have any of their own proprietary funds, where some of these big companies that also offer their own mutual funds might cut you a deal and give you lower pricing if you use some of their funds, which, isn't always terrible, but there are some conflicts there. And the simplest, cleanest approach is just paying a fixed dollar fee that's really easy to understand, having no restrictions on the funds, and having a record keeper, like one of those I mentioned, have no vested interest in which funds that you select. Just easy, simple, clean, and they all have some form of what's called payroll integration. And, they all have what's called retirement plan calculators on their website. At least I think Employee Fiduciary has that, where participants can enter in their assets and their expected growth rate and their contribution rate and what they think inflation will be and their retirement age and how long they think they're going to live. And it'll, based on your adjustments, spit out what your monthly income is going to be. And just know that those tools are available because you're paying for them. And you don't need to always use that. But as you get close to retirement, it's just nice to know that those tools are available. That's part of what a financial advisor can help with. And do you want ongoing advice provided by an outside advisor to the participants, or do you just want to let them fend for themselves and use their own advisor? I'm an advisor, but I'm not saying it's terrible to not have one and just let people figure it out themselves and use their own advisors, but it's a nice convenience to have.
Is it difficult to move from plan to plan? Like if they do their research and they find, I set this plan up 10 years ago. I'm now looking at it. It's not something that we really want to use anymore. Is it hard to move from one to another?
It's a lot harder to move plans like where you're asking than it is to simply change the financial advisor on the plan. In some cases, it is a good idea to move when you have a really expensive record keeper that's just not flexible on the pricing and you have significant assets in your plan. If you only have like $200,000-300,000 or really under $1 million in your plan, the record keeper might be a bit expensive, but again, it only gets more expensive based on the growth of the assets. So it may not be worth the savings in terms of switching at that point. And it is a lot of work. So I'm always cautious to try to have plan sponsors, business owners, try and switch their record keeper like with the whole investment platform if they don't have to. Before you do anything, and some people think, well, we got better funds. Pretty much every provider has the same funds. Oh, we got better pricing. Well, Not necessarily, because don't forget, before you switch, maybe try negotiating first before you go through this whole process. Maybe try checking which other funds are available within their platform, because most of them, even if they're not totally what I call open architecture and they have some restrictions, there are other arrangements where you don't have to choose their proprietary funds and you can still negotiate. So I would just say, be careful. Don't do anything. I mean, call me before you switch. Seriously. And that doesn't mean you got to pay me or use me as an advisor. I spend more time giving away free advice than I do having people engaging my services, because sometimes the answer is very simple. And it's not always hiring an advisor on an ongoing basis or switching platforms.
How often should a business owner review their plan in the details to see if, they've already fixed it once, you want to have some sort of regular check, regular maintenance? How often should a business owner be checking things like that?
Well, if you're using one of the platforms that I said and you're getting billed, there's really not that much of a need to review it, other than, well, let's at least look at the investments to make sure that we have a fully diversified fund lineup. And very, very few plans have these alternative investments that I mentioned, other types of commodities like platinum and copper, oil exposure, as well as gold and silver. Those are available in these providers I mentioned, but a lot of these alternative assets, or at least not to the extent that I mentioned all of those assets, a lot of those are not available in a lot of those plans. So I would say, I'm not sure how often, but I would say if you haven't, ask those questions immediately. Are my fees negotiable? What are they? Who's getting what? Are you getting a hard dollar or percentage fee? Can we pay at the employer level? And are these particular funds even available? In almost all cases, they're not available as one of the default options, but usually there's like 20 or 30 or 50 or something options available for the participants, but there's often hundreds or thousands of options that the plan sponsor could make available to the participants. They only just allow maybe 30 or so at a time. So that's why I say be careful before you switch and get a whole full list of what investments are available in the plan you have before you make any major change.
All right. A lot of valuable information here, certainly information that I wasn't aware of. Final question, what's one thing that a small firm architect can do today to build a better business for tomorrow?
I would say just have a more competitive retirement plan. And the reason is a 1% fee, and this is on the Department of Labor's website, for a 35-year-old participant with a $25,000 balance over the next 30 years of their investing lifetime until they get to age 65 will cost them about 28% of their balance, or in that case, about $64,000 in fees. And if you have a bigger balance and you're making more contributions, it's going to be much more. So what you're essentially doing by having the employer pay all the fees, which is often advantageous because the business owner is bearing most of the costs personally out of his or her own personal account, again, with non-tax deductible dollars, you can make your plan way more competitive than any other small business plan, because almost all plans do not pay all the fees at the employer level, and they don't even know they can do it.
All right. His name is Paul Sippil, Sippil, Paul Sippil and Associates, and it's paulsippil.com if you want to check out what Paul's doing. And maybe if you have any questions, he's open to answer any of your questions, paulsippil.com. Paul, thank you. I appreciate you for coming by here, sharing some very valuable information that many of us probably did not even know. And I appreciate you coming by here and sharing your knowledge at EntreArchitect Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of EntreArchitect Podcast, please share a link with a friend, because that's how we've continued to grow and serve thousands more small firm architects just like you. Thank you to our sponsors for this episode. Links to the sponsors and all the resources we discussed today, they are all available in the show notes for this episode at entrearchitect.com/podcast. EntreArchitect is a proud member of the Gable Media Network. It's the multimedia network moving the architecture, engineering, and construction industries forward through the power of storytelling. You can earn AIA continuing education credits by listening to select episodes of this podcast and many others at gablemedia.com/members. And if you are a small firm architect, listen up. Join us today at EntreArchitect Network. It's the worldwide community for entrepreneur architects. We've been around since 2012, and our basic level is now free to join. Yes, you can join EntreArchitect Network for free. And that gives you access to valuable business resources and our global community of architects. And you can upgrade anytime for live coaching, AIA-approved training, and mastermind support. So visit EntreArchitect.com to learn more and to get started. My name is Mark R. LePage. Thank you for listening to the EntreArchitect Podcast. Love, learn, share.